Hello, Andreas.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good to see you. Where are you? In your village?
In Jakarta, yes.
In
So,
the town? No, but you live outside, no?
I have two houses.
Okay.
My apartment is about next to the Parliament building, basically, across the street.
Oh,
Mhm.
oh.
So it's
In the thick of things.
quite smoky during
Quite
the
smoky.
weekends.
Has it subsided, or it still will you think continue today?
It is continuing today, although not as big as yesterday, I guess, or Thursday, but it will continue Monday, Tuesday next week.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So what do you think is the demand? What will they want to do?
They are very, very angry. People are very angry. They are frustrated with, of course, the arrogance of the parliament, increase their
Hmm.
housing allowance. They are also upset with the political situation where their representative mostly answer to their political parties rather than constituencies or voters. I think people are also angry with growing economic difficulties because of the austerity program by the government. It started to bite, not as serious as 1998, but it is growing. Last but not the least is police brutalities. Police brutality.
You see, there is a fundamental challenge with this list system of elections of MPs.
It is.
You never identify your own MP. Like
Yeah,
in India, there are constituencies. So I know the MP of my constituency.
that
I
is that
can go to him, and
that
he knows that he has to come back to. So every weekend, my MP spends time in my constituency. He is answering. He is on the road. He knows if he doesn't respond, at least whether he's able to do or not is a different question. But he is a visible face. And we all know our MPs. Here, the MPs become faceless because of the list system. I think there's
it
some
is.
fundamental reform may be needed. In
It is a
democracy, the
fundamental
list
flaw
system
of
is
Indonesian
challenging.
election system.
Yeah,
I do
yeah,
not know who represent me in the parliament.
yeah.
I do not know. I used to
Yeah.
live in the US. I'm not an American citizen. I've just lived there. But even as a resident, I could ask help from either my senator or my representative where I live.
Mm, mm.
Not here.
Not here, yeah.
Not here. There is a disconnect between.
Disconnect between the people and the representatives, yeah. I also felt it, I also see it.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to a lot of people. I think it is a challenge of in mature democracies in France and all, it works.
Oh,
But
yeah.
here it doesn't.
In the UK, every week, uh, an MP should go back to their constituency to answer questions. Every week, it is a must.
Mm. No, it is true for India also. The lower house is all about people. I used to be a private secretary to a minister, and I
Mhm.
used to get very frustrated at that time because half my work was constituency work. And we
Yes.
used to go back to the constituency and meet people, and people would come to us and
It is
because
tiring, but that is politics.
hmm.
That is a representative politics.
Sachin, good morning.
Good morning,
You
Pa
seem to
Douglas. Good
be.
morning, Sandeep ji. How are you?
Should we start? Is
Yeah,
the
we're ready to start.
Let's
okay?
go.
So,
Is
uh,
is is Devjyot there?
Navjot is here as well. Navjot, are you here?
Morning, Ambassador. Yeah.
Navjot?
Devjyot, where are you?
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we're able to hear you. And there you see
There
you
you
also.
are.
Okay.
Okay, we'll get started.
Lot of interesting things in Thailand also since yesterday.
Well, let's not get started on that. It's been a long day and a long night, and we have a long week ahead for us in Thailand.
Yeah, let's focus. Yeah, let's start.
Okay, so Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera bagi kita semuanya. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Shalom, salam kebajikan. Saya pakai bahasa campur ya sedikit. I'm going to use a little bit of English and bahasa Indonesia because we have with us here today Mr. Devjyot Ghoshal, who is the Chief Correspondent of Reuters in Thailand and Myanmar. Thank you, Devjyot, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, and kami juga ada di sini Bapak Andreas Harsono, dia peneliti Human Rights Watch and Jurnalis Senior. Thank you, Pak Andreas, for joining us today. Okay, so we are going to now have a little bit of a background of why we are doing this. Kami hari ini sebetulnya topiknya sangat relevan ya. Karena human rights reporting itu adalah satu topik yang sangat penting. Human rights reporting is very important subject, especially what's going on in the last few days. So I think the timing of our program is also very good. I think we would like to firstly thank all the participants, semua partisipan yang hadir hari ini. Saya juga udah pernah dapat message dari beberapa yang tidak bisa join hari ini karena sudah punya tugas dari masing-masing newsroom. So many of the journalists have got an assignment for covering the news. So we actually have about 180 to 200 people joining the program, but we may have maybe about a half of it today because of the job given to them by the newsrooms. So we will conduct a recorded episode interaction with them in a few days, but we will go ahead today and do the recording so that we can have live participation from everyone here. So karena kami sudah punya Bapak Duta Besar Sandeep Chakrabarty hari ini di sini, saya minta beliau kasih pengantar sedikit untuk kenapa kami mulai dengan program ini. Mungkin Anda udah pernah dengar ini sebelumnya, but nanti kita dengar sebentar dari beliau dulu. We will hear a few words from Ambassador Sandeep Chakrabarty about this program and why we're doing this, and then we'll get started with our moderator, Dafa. Thank you very much, and over to you, Pak Sandeep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll speak in English and I hope AI will help us in translating. First of all, thank you, Sachin, for organizing jointly with the embassy this quite an interesting and amazing program, Voices for the Future. A few weeks back, we had the inauguration where we were joined by Ibu Ina Krishnamurthy, Indonesian ambassador to India, and also the spokesperson for the government of India, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Randhir Jaiswal. So we had an introductory session already. This is the first session of several sessions that we will hold every week, basically going ahead with the fundamentals of journalism, reporting, and various aspects of journalism. I am really happy that the two resource person who have joined, I know them personally, Bapa Andreas Harsono of Human Rights Watch and Devjyot. They are the two experts in this theme. Andreas, of course, he lives human rights day in, day out. He breathes human rights. He's a committed human rights person. But Devjyot, I would like to mention, is that he chose this topic among the several topics that we gave. So he brings passion and commitment to the subject. Whereas I am a foreign diplomat and it's not appropriate for me to comment on domestic issues, but it's a very, very opportune moment because at this moment when we are talking, the Minister of Human Rights of Indonesia is on a bilateral visit to India. Can you believe that? It's quite an amazing coincidence of events that Mr. Pigai is in India. He's meeting with our Ministry of Law, Human Rights Commission, and already discussions are on for closer collaboration between the Human Rights Commission of India and the Human Rights Commission and the Ministry of Human Rights in Indonesia. In India, we do not have a Ministry of Human Rights, but we of course have a very powerful Human Rights Commission. And I think this topic is very, very central. It is very important. And just a factoid before I hand over to Dafa. is that the word human rights was actually coined by an Indian diplomat in the UN when the United Nations Human Rights Charter was being formulated, I think in the early 50s. At that time, it was called Rights of Man, but it was an Indian woman delegate at the Human Rights Conference who said that why should it be rights of man? They are also rights of women. So why don't we call them human rights? So this is our unique contribution to the whole narrative on human rights. And India has moved a long way in protection of human rights. There are, of course, challenges as there are in all countries. But I think it's a very, very important topic that the voices of the future have chosen. And I'm looking forward to hearing both of you. And also, I am sure that the participants from newsrooms across Indonesia will benefit a lot from hearing from the two experts on the subject. Thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you, Bapak Dubes. Thank you, Pak Ambassador Sandeep. The translations are on. I think all the participants, semua participant bisa kan setting translation, the caption, hide caption atau show caption. Sudah ada penjelasan dari panitia di kolom chat. So it's there for everyone to set the translation, which is quite good. So terima kasih, and now I'm going to give it to Pak Dafa to run the program. Sekarang kita mulai dengan Pak Dafa yang akan jadi moderator untuk hari ini. Thank you very much, and thank you once again to Pak Andreas and Pak Devjyot and Pak Sandeep for joining us this morning.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Sachin, and also Pak Mr. Ambassador Sandeep Chakraborty for the insightful and very encouraging opening words for today's session. So, I'm Dafa. My name is Dafa, and I'm from Indian News Desk, and I will be the moderator for today's session. So, today's session is Voices of Tomorrow with the topic of human rights reporting. But before that, I would like to welcome Mr. Andreas and also Mr. Devjyot for coming and presenting the material here. I'd like to welcome all of the participants here to join this presentation from Indian News Desk. So before further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Devjyot for presenting for the first session in this meeting. Hello, Mr. Devjyot.
Hi, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can
Excellent.
hear
So
you.
I'm going to share my screen and open a presentation if that's okay.
Okay, it's okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Got it. Are you able to see this?
Yes, I'm able
Okay.
to see this.
Right. So let me start. So I think I want to just start by thanking Ambassador Chakraborty for having me here, as well as the India News Desk. You know, it's a privilege to speak to so many practicing journalists in one place, and of course in the company of Andreas, who as practicing journalists we've seen your work for many years, and so it's a privilege to present this alongside you. For the purposes of this presentation, I think I'm going to focus mainly on the practice of human rights reporting and how we go about it. I'll start with a very brief introduction to myself and what I do, because just as a way of sort of prefacing the rest of this presentation. So my name is Devjyot Ghoshal. I'm the chief correspondent for Thailand and Myanmar at Reuters News. I am currently based in Bangkok. I've been here for about the last 2.5 years, and in my job, I basically run two teams, one team that focuses on Thailand and the other team that focuses on Myanmar. Our Myanmar coverage is something that I'm very proud of, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But I think what makes our Myanmar coverage so incredibly challenging, and will probably be one of the sort of focuses for this presentation, is the fact that we actually don't have access to the country on the ground. So because of because of the military coup in Myanmar and because of Reuters' history in covering Myanmar, we actually cover the whole country remotely. So I have 2 correspondents who are based in Thailand, and then we have teams in Bangladesh and elsewhere who assist us. But we actually aren't able to report from inside Myanmar. And I just want to underline that because from our perspective, Myanmar is an incredibly important story, particularly from a human rights perspective, because it is so closed and because it is so hard to get information out of there. But despite that, I think we focus and we find ways of telling those stories. Before I came to Southeast Asia, I was based in India with Reuters for about 4 years. I covered the second term of Prime Minister Modi. I covered the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir in northern India in 2019. I covered communal riots in New Delhi. The year after, I've covered the absolute mayhem of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then in the last few years, in 2022, I spent almost 4 or 5 months on the ground in Sri Lanka as the Sri Lankan debt crisis spiraled and led to a change in government. And since 2023, I've been in Southeast Asia. I've been in Bangkok. One of the things that Ambassador mentioned was that I actually chose this topic, and part of the reason for choosing that was the focused work that we've done on human rights, particularly on Myanmar. And so in the 2025 SOPA Awards, and the SOPA is effectively one of the most prestigious journalism awards in Asia Pacific. My team, the Reuters team, we were fortunate enough to win the award for excellence for our reporting on the situation in Myanmar. And I think my sort of interest to take the topic was to also sort of talk about some of the reporting techniques and some of our approaches in terms of how we went about reporting that story. And that's something I'd want to get into later in the presentation. I think that the sort of the broad points or one of the sort of ways of looking at this is, why is human rights reporting important at a time like now? And then the question is, how do you actually go ahead and cover it? One of the things that I'm going to lean on in the course of this discussion is something that we follow very closely at Reuters, which is called the Reuters Trust Principles. And particularly at a time when you have not only very sensitive situations, but you also have very complex conditions within which to report. The trust principles almost sort of act as a guideline for us. It was sort of when we go about doing our reporting. And I thought I would share the Reuters trust principles with the group here, because it may in fact help you, in sort of how you're approaching reporting, because it certainly is absolutely sacrosanct for us at Reuters, but also at an individual level is incredibly helpful. As we sort of go around and do these stories. I think one of the questions is to maybe start with is to say, what is the importance of human rights reporting? And I think that probably comes back to the question of why is journalism important? And I think there are 2 ways of looking at this. They're very simple ways, but these are methods that I've always found useful. In terms of something, sometimes asking myself why I do what I do. I think the 2 ways of looking at why journalism is important is that, firstly, we chronicle the world around us. There's so much happening. And, we almost in a way write the first draft of history. And if we are writing the first draft of history, I think there is a huge responsibility on us to make sure that that first draft of history is accurate. And it's accurate and it covers all sides. So in that sense, I think if we're writing or if we're attempting to write the first draft of history, human rights is incredibly important within that framework, because at the end of the day, pretty much all journalism that is done is journalism about people. And so in some way or the other, you will be telling a human story. I think that the second lens that I often use to understand why we do journalism and what we do is a combination of two things. One is to give voice to the voiceless, and the second is to hold power to account. I think on the first element, we want very often to tell stories of people who would not have a way to convey their experience to an outside world. And so whether that is, in the last few years, stories that we've done, when we had the first wave of hostages who were released from Gaza after the conflict erupted, surprisingly, there were a large number of Thai workers. And because you have people from Thailand who actually go to Israel to work in the agricultural sector, and we actually had, within the first batch of hostages who were released by the Palestinian groups, we actually had a bunch of Thai workers. And so I actually traveled to northern Thailand to interview one of these hostages who had just been released. And it was an incredibly difficult interview to do, because you've just had someone who's come out of, I think, after 60 days of captivity, somewhere in the Gaza Strip. But it's important to tell that person's story to the world so that people know what they experienced. And in that sense, you're trying to give voice to people who would normally not have a voice. And you have to do that with responsibility and with empathy. And the second element of that is holding power to account. So what we will see, or what we will acts of journalism that we will commit very often actually is to hold powerful individuals or powerful institutions, or powerful organizations to account, and that's again an incredibly important function of what we do. Because if you look at journalism in the sort of classic democratic framework, I mean, we are one of the states, and therefore we have a responsibility, in democracies like India and Indonesia, to actually work as a watchdog. And so in that sense, we have a responsibility to hold power to account. I'm just going to mention these discussion points early on so that it's something, everyone who's sort of participating can just maybe pick up notes on this, and I'll come back to this at the end of the presentation, or sort of in the Q&A to have a discussion on this. But I think the main takeaways that I would hope you gather from this presentation is, I think, just a broad sense of the things you need to keep in mind when you're interviewing subjects for sensitive stories. I think the multiple factors to keep in mind when you're reporting on communal conflicts or divisive issues, or even violent events, for instance. And I think, what we've seen in Indonesia in the last few days, and what may continue, I think is very fertile ground to actually think about some of these ideas, because it is at times like this, when passions are running high, that journalists actually have the function to sit back and be objective and actually cover these stories in a meaningful way. And the last point is basically, in these circumstances, how do you maintain objectivity, but you also show empathy, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with human beings, and this, as journalists, we have to have a certain amount of empathy when we enter these situations, even though we're looking for the truth. So that brings me back to the Reuters trust principles. And Reuters is a much older organization, but the trust principles were established in 1941 to safeguard the independence and integrity of Reuters. It's something that we take very seriously because it's because we're a news agency. We're working in this environment where speed is very, very important, and I think at a time like now within the media ecosystem where almost everyone is also publishing online, this is a useful tool, because it almost is sort of begs one to think, how do you balance speed with accuracy and with balance? And so the trust principles, even though they were established in 1941, are still a very essential tool and are still a very useful tool for us as we go about our work every day at Reuters. I think the core commitments are an interesting thing. So I think, and this is journalism 101, I think, to have independence from any particular interest groups. And I think because we're a global news agency, we often find ourselves on reporting on both sides of a conflict. And I can give you an example. I think in the last few weeks, there was the border conflict between Thailand and Cambodia. And as the chief correspondent of Reuters in Thailand, it was one of the biggest stories that we were handling for a period of about 2 or 3 weeks. And so while we're doing that, if we have an alignment with either the Thai side or the Cambodian side, that obviously immediately makes sure, sort of ensures that we are not independent. And so I think this is an organizational principle to say that we will sort of be independent of any interest groups, and then that informs our journalism, but that also allows us to act in a very unbiased way. And that takes me to the second part, which is integrity and freedom from bias. Again, I think in certain situations, it can be very easy to take sides. But I think one of the fundamental duties of journalism and one of the fundamental duties of a responsible journalist is to work with as much integrity and freedom from bias as possible. And it might seem challenging or difficult at times, but I think even to always have that thought in your head that I am basically pursuing facts and I'm pursuing information. And information and facts can come from multiple sides, but it's my responsibility to distill that, to filter that, to comprehensively look at an event from as many sides as possible, so that the output is as free from bias as possible. I think that has to be something that is imbibed within our thought process. The other commitment is to be is an extension of that, is to be unbiased and be reliable, and we'll come back to the notion of reliability, but I think again, in terms of thinking of journalism or sort of thinking of the profession of being a journalist, I think it's just I think reliance is something, or the fact that readers rely on you to provide accurate information. This is something that's built over time, and your reputation is built over time. And I think one of the things never to, you know, to take lightly is reputation. I think in our profession, in our business, reputation is incredibly important. And I think many of us working journalists, we do everything that we can to ensure that we maintain that reputation of being unbiased and being reliable and being truthful. And it's something particularly in the human rights reporting context to think about clearly. I think the last 2 points are responsibility to all stakeholders. I think you know, as large news organizations, we serve a large range of clients and stakeholders, and I think it's important to consider, you know, particularly in conflict or divisive situations, that our news is going to be consumed by people on both sides, and so therefore our news has to be bulletproof. You know, what our output has to cross that threshold of accuracy, and so we cannot be, you know, we can't be wrong, and if we are wrong, we have to correct quickly. And lastly is a commitment to innovation. I think, you know, as we've all seen in the last 10-15 years, I started in journalism 17-18 years ago. I used to work at newspapers, and then we had this massive digital boom, and, you know, platforms have constantly evolved, and so there has to be a commitment to actually sort of latch onto this technology and to expand. Some of this will overlap, but I sort of wanted to go through this because I think this functionally impacts the work that we do. I think in a very simple way, and some of this, my apologies, may be very, very obvious, but I sort of still want to go through it. I call it the 10 absolutes of journalism, and some of this is from the Reuters Handbook of Journalism, which is something we refer to almost on a daily basis. I think firstly, accuracy is sacrosanct, you know, particularly at a time when speed is very important, and people want to publish stories quickly. Sure, please publish quickly, but make sure you're absolutely certain of what you're putting out, or certain to a very high degree. And so I think, and particularly in human rights reporting, I mean, what you're putting out has a real impact on people, and actually, in some cases, endangers the safety of people if the information is not accurate. So I think accuracy is key. The second thing is correct errors openly. And I've worked at different news organizations, and different news organizations have different standards for corrections. But it's something that we take incredibly seriously at Reuters, and maybe that's because we are a news agency, and, you know, we publish information to, you know, thousands of publications every day. But I think this is a key tenet. We, at the end of the day, yes, we're journalists, but we're also human, and we can make mistakes. And I think it is our responsibility to our readers to correct those mistakes openly and quickly. And I think that then goes back to the notion of being reliable and maintaining our reputation. And I know some journalists, you know, think twice about correction because maybe it makes their work look bad. But the simple fact is, you know, as professionals, we have to take the responsibility that if we do good work, we will also make mistakes. And when we make those mistakes, we have to correct them. I think that the third element is to strive for balance and freedom for bias. And I think balance is a very important topic in this, you know, when we talk about human rights reporting, and we'll come back to this later in the presentation. But it's something that we should think about. When we're doing a story, and, you know, I can mention several examples from the work that I did in India, or the work that I've done in South Asia or in Southeast Asia. In certain situations, very often in conflict situations, you will get information from one side. Maybe the other side at that moment is not sharing that much information. It's our responsibility as journalists to put out whatever information we gather after vetting it. How do you get balance? In some thinking, the rationale would be we try and call the other side for comment, and we say, you know, we're publishing this story. Do you have any comment? Or we send an email. I would want to say that finding balance is not just reaching out to the other side and asking them for comment. I think balance is also looking at it from the perspective of the opposing side, or in fact, making the effort to actually to making the effort and spending the time to research what the other side may have said in the past. We often have this issue when we're reporting on Myanmar, because the Myanmar junta, currently the interim government, is not very open with journalists in terms of responding. But we still want to put their point of view in stories, because otherwise it'll, you know, we run the risk of stories being one-sided. And we actually, in many ways, we spend a lot of time looking at statements, and even if they're in the past, even if they're not necessarily, you know, a current comment to the story that we're doing at the moment, we will try very hard to try and get that information, to put their perspective or things they have said in the past in context of what we're reporting. And so I think it's important to think about balance, because you certainly don't want to do journalism that seems to support one side against the other, and especially when it comes to human rights issues. I think the fourth is disclosing conflicts of interest, and I think this becomes important. You know, in large democracies, you know, you may have an affinity or you may have an affiliation with one group. How do you then go ahead and report? And some of these disclosures of conflict of interest have to be internal. I think if you are too close to a story, if you are maybe from the same ethnic group that is involved in one of these sort of sensitive issues, have a conversation with your editor. I think, you know, internally there has to be a discussion about, you know, maybe that you're doing a story that has, you know, that involves a company, you know, or say in Indonesia, you're doing a story on the nickel industry about IMIP, right? But you may actually have a relative or a family member who works at IMIP. When you're doing that story, you have to have a discussion internally to say, look, I have a, you know, I have a relation with somebody who's at IMIP. And that discussion is important not just to disclose your conflict of interest, but that discussion is important to ensure the safety of you know, the other person. So I think not all of these things have to be external discussions. I think a lot of them have to be internal discussions with your editors, within newsrooms. The fifth is respect privileged information, and I'll do 5 and 6 together, which is respect privileged information and protect sources. And particularly in the context of what we do in Myanmar, this is incredibly important. We often rely on sources who speak to us at the risk of their lives. If certain authorities in certain countries find out that they are speaking to journalists, particularly speaking to foreign journalists, those people could you know, be imprisoned or even worse. And so when we're reporting, you know, we have to be incredibly careful during the reporting process itself to ensure that, you know, these people are protected. And what does that mean? I won't have certain conversations with certain people on open phone calls. I may not even have those conversations on WhatsApp. I will only have those conversations on Signal. If I'm recording those conversations, sometimes I will transcribe them and put the recording away in an air-gapped device, a device that doesn't connect to the internet, for their security. In certain situations, some sources may not want to speak to me, you know, online. They may only be willing to speak to me in person. And so then if I'm going to meet people, and I can give you an example, we did a story last year, which was part of the SOPA package, the package that won the SOPA award. I was interviewing active Rohingya insurgents active Rohingya militants in Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar, and they were unwilling to have that conversation with me in person. And so when I'm out there reporting, I also have to protect those sources in the sense that I have to ensure that I'm not followed for my own safety, but also for the safety of the people I'm meeting. And so protecting sources is something that is absolutely sacrosanct. And it's something, particularly in human rights reporting, we have to think about very, 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 very carefully. The seventh thing is to avoid opinion in news stories, and I think it sometimes is obvious, but I think this has to be an exercise in diligence. I think anytime you're writing a story, and I used to have a professor at journalism school at Columbia, at Columbia University, who would tell me, we would write these stories in class, and she would basically underline paragraphs and would say, says who. And I think if you use that paradigm to say every time you're writing a story, you write one paragraph and you say, what is the source of this information? Who's saying this? Where is it coming from? I think that is one that I find that a useful way to ensure that opinion does not seep in, because then you're just stacking facts after facts. The eighth is obvious: never fabricate or plagiarize. If you are picking up material or picking up material from another publication or another source, attribute clearly, say, Reuters reported, Bloomberg reported, New York Times reported. If it's from an academic paper, I think attribution is key. In journalism, it goes back to the first point, which is accuracy. You have to be accurate, you have to be transparent. And so that means that you never fabricate, plagiarize. But if you're also taking from other resources, attribute clearly. I think the ninth, and this becomes very important in the age of AI, don't alter images. If you're writing as it's a cliche, but a picture says 1,000 words. It's the same thing. If you're plagiarizing 1,000 words, or if you're altering using AI a photograph, or you're cropping an important part that changes the meaning of a photo, that's doing the same thing. So, I know we post a lot on Instagram and we post a lot on X, and think about images in the same way that you think about stories, because alteration changes the meaning. And so then that also muddies accuracy. And I think the last thing is never pay for stories or accept bribes. Sometimes you will have people who will say, oh, if you give me $1,000, I'll give you a great story. We that happens to us, and we say, no, thank you. We can't, we will neither pay or nor will we accept. Because the moment you do that, you think about it in terms of the list. You don't know about accuracy. You certainly lose balance. You certainly lose freedom from bias. You're not disclosing conflict of interest. You're not protecting any sources. You don't know whether information is fabricated or plagiarized. So you're basically then taking off, every wrong thing that you can do. So, number 10 is a no-brainer, but I understand it happens. But no matter the temptation, the moment you do it, your story is tainted. I'll sort of try and run through some of these now that we've laid the foundation. I think the core principles is accuracy over speed. Yes, I work at a news agency, and we measure our output in seconds, not even minutes. Yesterday, for example, when the court in Thailand said that Prime Minister Paetongtarn was suspended, it's competitive to the extent that we measure how well we do in a matter of seconds. It's not even minutes. But accuracy is important over speed. I say this to my team sometimes. I'm okay being second, but I'm not okay being wrong on certain stories. And particularly in conflict or in crisis zones, if you're wrong, you actually can put you can put lives at risk. And so sometimes, or in most cases, in most cases like this, please prioritize accuracy, because if you're not doing that, then your journalism is, if your journalism is incorrect, it doesn't matter if you're fast, you're wrong, and that doesn't count. The second thing is contextual depth. Avoid sensationalism, explain root causes. Think about this in this way. The work that we do, and I'll sort of explain some of this in examples going forward. Some of the work that we do, we're not writing for audiences who are particularly familiar with it. So if I'm writing about Myanmar, or if I'm writing about Sri Lanka, or if I'm writing about some part of India, readers in Indonesia may not be familiar with it. And if I write it in a very sensationalist way, I'm doing a disservice to my readers because I'm not giving them full context, but I'm also doing a disservice to the subject because I'm not being able to explain it well. And I think this goes back to the idea of stacking facts. So I think even if you have a great exclusive revelatory story that has great new information, you also have to think very carefully about how do you contextualize that information. And in my experience, a lot of questions of balance and bias can also be addressed when you're explaining or providing this contextual depth. Because how you provide the background in a way gives the reader the context to understand the present. And as we know, history is an extremely powerful tool. And so if you're able to explain the history carefully, diligently, in a balanced way with good research, then that informs your journalism going forward. The third thing is sensitivity to victims. Avoid re-traumatizing or exposure. And I think this is very, very hard, but this is also very, very important. And let me explain to you why this is hard. This is hard because I think as journalists, we're chasing information. In a lot of cases, the information will come from people who've just gone through a very difficult or a very traumatic experience. How do you approach that? Now, in the case, I'll give you an example. In the case of the hostage, the Thai farm hostage who had just been released from Gaza and had come back to Thailand, we traveled up to Isan where we went to interview him. But I basically asked a colleague who speaks Thai to go to him and say, "We're here. If you don't want to talk to us, we completely understand, and there is absolutely no pressure. But we want to tell your story to the world. If you do want to talk to us, we'll wait. If you want to take 4 days to talk to us, that's fine. We'll wait. Or you want us to come later, we'll come later. But for us, your comfort is the most important thing." And I think we have to, as journalists, understand that we're not dealing with a robot. These are real people who've gone through real experiences. And if we want them to explain to us what they've gone through, it can't be transactional. It has to be, we have to have the empathy to say, I know you've come through a very difficult time. And very often when I start these interviews, I start by saying, thank you for agreeing to talk to me. And I am so sorry that I'm going to ask you difficult questions. If you are uncomfortable at any time, please tell me and I will not ask you further. And I've had those interviews with people who've just come out of violence, Rohingya who've just escaped Myanmar, lost family members on the way, people who've had relatives killed in communal violence. Very often they will say, I will talk about this, but I don't want to talk about this. And you have to respect the boundary. As journalists, and we've seen this, journalists will come and sort of push people to give them information. That's really unprofessional. And that's no way to go about it. The other thing is balance. Represent all sides, but not at the cost of truth. That's an important idea. I think in journalism, we have to think about, yes, there has to be balance, but it also can't be, if one side is doing something incredibly wrong or clearly illegal, balance is not giving, balance is giving both sides voice, but also having accuracy. And I think that comes with experience. But don't think about, I'm writing a 500-word story, and balance will mean that I write 250 words on each side. It's more complex than that, and you have to think about it that way. And I think the last thing here is verification. And again, our Myanmar reporting is very important here, because we are not able to enter the country. One of the things that we do is, I have incredibly well sourced and experienced journalists. They'll call people. We will do long audio interviews, and we'll understand. And I will call sources in the humanitarian sector, diplomats in the government, and we'll get information. We combine those things to verify. But one of the things that we also do in Myanmar a lot is use satellite imagery to do verification. And I'll give you an example of that as we go down. We use data, we use open source data, we use satellite imagery, we will use, in some cases, I've done it during the India-China conflict, use radar imagery. So you have to think out of the box using open source intelligence technology to actually verify things. And it's important because you can have, if you have 4 sources who are saying the same thing, but I can show through independent analysis that what they're saying is true, that then increases the level of accuracy for my stories. And so that's something worth thinking through. I'll quickly go through this. We prefer named sources, but sometimes sources may not want to reveal their names. But when you have an interview with somebody, please be very clear. Yes, I'm going to quote you. No, I'm not going to quote you. Some people may say, I will speak to you, but I don't want any part of this conversation in a story. You have to respect that. Some people will say, yes, I will give you an interview, but you can only say an Indonesian official. Okay. In some cases, I speak to a foreign diplomat who's a source, and he says, maybe you can say a source in Myanmar. Don't even say a diplomat. So when you do those interviews, I think be very clear about how you're going to describe them. And if you have any questions, go back to the source and ask them, because the last thing you want to do is to do a story that puts that source's safety in trouble. So you have to protect sources. And lastly, pluralization. I think we do this as Reuters very well. We say very clearly, we have spoken to 4 sources, 5 sources. Sometimes it becomes a little bit of a pain. We end up, I think I've put out stories where we've said we've spoken to 18 people, and we'll specifically count those 18 people. So as transparent as you can be, the better it is. This is visual language and ethics. I'll be quick with it. Do not manipulate images, because images in a way are the same as text. If you start editing, you remove accuracy. Translation is key. Don't translate literally in some cases. But again, be sensible about how you're translating, because grammar shifts as well. Don't use dehumanizing language. Describe what you see. Be accurate. And reflect reality, not drama. So don't sensationalize. If there is violence, describe the violence as you're seeing it. Don't say, oh, there was unexplainable violence outside the Indonesian parliament on Friday. Please say exactly what you saw. Protecting sources and yourself, secure communication channels. I think this is very, very, very important. Don't have conversations on an open phone line. Try and use tools like Signal. No, Telegram is not safe. WhatsApp is not safe. Try and use Signal as much as possible. Clarify confidential agreements. We don't do this, but in some cases, sources may say we will only talk to you on the basis of an agreement. Go back to your editor and go to a lawyer and sort that out. Be aware of legal and physical risks, and I think this is important, particularly in large, complex countries. You don't want to be caught in a situation where you're sitting with information that you shouldn't have. So particularly when you're reporting sensitive stories, you have to think about your own safety as well as safety of sources. And both those things are interlinked. Because if you have a phone full of information from a source and you are picked up and detained, and your phone is also picked up by authorities, then you've compromised all your sources as well. So it's a complex thing, but think about it both in terms of protecting yourself and your sources, because both those things are interlinked. I'm gonna skip through it and go through a couple of examples, and then we'll finish. This is a story that I'm very proud of. It's a story that we did last year. It's about the burning of a town in Myanmar's Rakhine state. You have a militia group in Myanmar that basically goes and sets an entire series of settlements occupied by minority Rohingya Muslims on fire. Now, we keep hearing accounts of this, but we are not able to verify it. So at some point last year, and there are about 6 of us got together to do this story. These are 6 journalists in 4 different countries that collaborated to do this story. We not only spoke to people on the ground through phone calls inside Myanmar. I had a correspondent who traveled to the refugee camp in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar, to speak to refugees who had just crossed over. We were able to combine this reporting. But what made this reporting even more powerful was the fact that we got satellite images to confirm what the witnesses had told us. And so I'm just going to scroll. This is just a video, and this will show you. So we basically found that villages had been burned, and we used satellite imagery to actually show areas that had been burnt out. And so when you actually look at the satellite imagery, we can prove beyond any doubt that you actually have areas that have been burned. And so what we're doing is that we're using a combination of human reporting, and we're using a combination of OSINT and satellite imagery verification to basically understand the sequence of events. And then for this story, we did everything, that I described. We went to the other side. We spoke to the militia that was involved. We gave them an opportunity multiple times to respond. We went to the Myanmar junta, made contact with them, asked them questions. We also sort of spoke to people who had who had just crossed over and come. And so I think in many ways, in a lot of the reporting that we've done in the last few years, this story on Butidong sort of, really met our internal standards of what the strongest examples of human rights reporting would look at, which is combining the human element, intensive verification through interviews, but also relying on technology and open source information to actually, as much as possible, verify, what had happened. And after this story went out, we had a whole bunch of other publications that did stories on similar lines. And nobody, not even the militia that was involved in this, came back to us later and said your story was wrong, because we had done such intense verification in doing the story that it was very hard for anyone to challenge our version. That said, if there was anything wrong in the story, we would have corrected it. And again, classic, we protect sources, we made sure all communication was clear. People who spoke to us at great personal risk. People who were okay being named, we named them. Some people said, don't name us, we didn't name them. So all the issues that I've sort of addressed through this presentation, this was an example of sort of how we went about it. I'll end sort of with this in just a couple of minutes. Human rights reporting is partly about sort of doing these complex stories, but I think it's also, like I said, in some ways, giving voice to the voiceless and doing it with a huge amount of empathy. And one of the most powerful ways of doing this is through visual storytelling. The person on the slide here is a former Reuters journalist called Danish Siddiqui. Danish was one of my closest friends. He was a colleague I worked with very, very closely in India. Danish, unfortunately, was killed while on assignment by the Taliban about 4 years ago in Afghanistan. But why I brought up Danish's slide in this presentation is because in my 17, 18 years of doing journalism, I had never seen a journalist or a reporter with the amount of empathy that Danish had. So if Danish went into a room or he went into a situation to cover a story, he would actually put his camera away and just speak to the character. He would speak to the person, and he would sort of build a relationship as much as he could, even just in a 5-minute conversation. What have you eaten? Do you have medicine? Are you feeling okay? How's your family? Just basic conversation. And then would sort of, go on to take pictures. Danish has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, which is the biggest prize in our profession. And I just wanted to share this one story that Danish had done in India during the coronavirus crisis. This is a picture that he had taken of this farmer and his son as they were leaving New Delhi because India had done this very strict lockdown to stop the spread of COVID. And Danish went back in the middle of the COVID crisis to find this gentleman and his family in a village deep in central India, and actually went on to tell his story. And I use this example because this to me is one of the most powerful ways of telling a story. You have a big, big event that's going on, and very often you find one character, one compelling person, and you focus on them. And you try and tell the story of this bigger phenomena through this one person. And in many ways, this was an incredible story. He was just on the road, took a photograph of this one man, and then said, I wonder what this guy is doing now that he's gone back to the village. And they drove through the lockdown, I think 1,000 kilometers, found this man. There was no accommodation. So they stayed in a tent on his field. They just, bought a tent and they stayed in a tent and they cooked and they stayed there for 5 or 6 days. And they did this incredible story that provided an insight, into the lives of ordinary Indians who had been absolutely hammered by the pandemic. And this is, at the end, is the photograph of the same man who was on the road, and his son as they sit in their field. And I find this is one of the most powerful examples. In conclusion, for us, we uphold the trust principles in every story. It's absolutely sacrosanct. Human rights reporting, yes, it's about the facts, but it's also about, reporting truth with integrity. And lastly, you're writing the first draft of history. So your work can shape global understanding. These are the discussion points, and we can get to it later. I've run a bit over, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Devjyot, for giving us the very inspiring and very insightful talk from your presentation session. So I got some of key points from you that you highlighted that as a journalist, we have to think about human. You have to get the empathy to human, because it's not all about our agenda, but it's all about humanity. Thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Devjyot. So for our next session is the presentation for Mr. Andreas Harsono. Hello, good morning, Mr. Andreas Harsono.
Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi, apa kabar, Pak?
Baik.
Baik, baik. Untuk selanjutnya bisa dilanjutkan kepada Bapak Andreas Harsono. Mungkin nanti teman dari India News Desk bisa untuk menampilkan slides yang telah disiapkan oleh Pak Andreas.
Jadi saya akan bicara 2 hal. Satu, tentang makna kebenaran fungsional dalam jurnalisme. Ya, kebenaran fungsional termasuk hak asasi manusia. Yang kedua, saya ingin memancing debat soal apa yang disebut hak asasi manusia. Oke. Saya akan minta peserta untuk bergantian membaca masing-masing slide. Tentu sukarela. Kita mulai dulu. Next. Siapa mau membaca? Jadi ini buku pegangan yang saya pakai.
Saya, Pak.
Silakan.
Buku pegangan jurnalisme, Bill Kovacs, 1932, wartawan New York Times, kurator Nieman Foundation di Universitas Harvard, Tom Resensiel 1996, wartawan Los Angeles Times, terbit 2001, 3 tahun wawancara 1.200 wartawan, dan 300 lagi dalam diskusi tahun 1997. Pada 2007, update dan revisi di mana mereka tambah 1 elemen pada 9 elemen jurnalisme. Ia menerangkan peran warga dalam jurnalisme, terutama lewat media sosial. Pada 2014, versi ketiga terbit dengan data-data aktual. Pada 2021, versi keempat terbit dengan kata pengantar baru. Versi keempat ada data soal bagaimana jurnalisme gagal mencegah Donald Trump jadi presiden.
Ini buku yang jadi pegangan banyak wartawan, termasuk di Indonesia, diterjemahkan oleh Dewan Pers. Ya, ada 2 buku, satu lagi namanya Blur, itu tentang media sosial terutama. Next please, siapa mau baca? Jadi ada 10 elemen jurnalisme, ini yang pertama. Siapa yang mau baca? Silakan. Sukarela.
Boleh aku, Bang Andreas.
Bu Betty.
Oke. Satu, tujuan jurnalisme beritakan kebenaran. Kebenaran menurut siapa? Apakah apakah berita sama dengan kebenaran? Apakah akurasi sama dengan kebenaran? Bagaimana dengan kebenaran agama? Kebenaran yang bukan debat filsafat atau agama, tapi kebenaran fungsional yang sehari-hari diperlukan masyarakat. Perhatikan jutaan perjanjian internasional. Ibarat stalagmit, lapisan demi lapis berita, hari demi hari, bisa revisi layaknya ilmu pengetahuan, sejarah, dan sebagainya.
Jadi yang kita beritakan itu adalah kebenaran fungsional. Kata kuncinya adalah jutaan perjanjian internasional. Ya. Next please. Siapa lagi mau baca elemen kedua?
Boleh saya, Pak?
Silakan.
Iya. 2 loyalitas utama pada masyarakat. Menempatkan loyalitas perusahaan, audiens, citizen. Praktis punya tanggung jawab sosial yang tidak jarang melangkahi kepentingan organisasi mereka. Ironisnya, tanggung jawab itu sekaligus sumber keberhasilan organisasi. Segitiga media, audiens, advertiser, citizens. Ada hayalan untuk apa yang disebut masyarakat. Menuntut pagar api di mana bisnis interest dipisahkan dengan interest masyarakat.
Jadi ini elemen kedua. Elemen kedua ini mengatakan loyalitas utama pada masyarakat. Jadi media itu digambarkan sebagai segitiga. Satu sisi adalah audiens, pembaca, pemirsa, pendengar ya. Kalau video tentu pemirsa, kalau audio pendengar, kalau bacaan pemirsa pembaca. Nah, sisi kedua adalah yang ngasih uang. Iklan, sponsor, dan seterusnya. Sisi ketiga adalah citizen atau masyarakat. Ketiga sisi ini harus dilayani. Tetapi sering ada konflik of interest. Bila kita dapat uang dari katakanlah perusahaan mana, Telkomsel atau Pemda, kadang-kadang kan sponsor ini minta yang berita ini tolong dibeginikan itu. Atau pemirsa, pembaca. Pembaca ini sangat suka dengan berita yang sensasional, seks, kriminalitas. Nah, elemen kedua ini mengatakan yang menjadi loyalitas utama pada masyarakat yang belum tentu membaca berita kita. Tetapi itu yang kita khayalkan sebagai citizen. Poin terakhir adalah di dalam setiap perusahaan media ada pagar api. Uang tidak boleh mempengaruhi liputan. Dan yang lebih top lagi adalah praktisi jurnalisme, termasuk kita semua, punya tanggung jawab sosial yang tidak jarang melangkahi kepentingan organisasi di mana kita bekerja. Kalau kita bekerja buat Reuters misalnya, dan Reuters menjadi berita, tidak jarang kita harus melangkahi kepentingan Reuters. Nah, ironisnya,
Bagus tahu.
ya. Next please, siapa mau baca yang berikutnya? Bila ada pertanyaan langsung angkat tangan ya. Next please.
Saya, halo.
Layarnya dimajukan, Mbak.
Oke. 3, esensi jurnalisme adalah verifikasi. Disiplin verifikasi bedakan jurnalisme dengan hiburan, propaganda, fiksi, infotainment, atau seni. Tak setiap orang tahu standar verifikasi. Bagaimana caranya? Wait. There is but one kind of unity possible in a world as diverse as ours. It is unity of method rather than aim, the unity of discipline experiment. Walter Lippmann on Public Opinion 1923. Metode jurnalisme bisa objektif, tapi objektivitas bukan tujuan. Kelima, bagaimana menilai film Oppenheimer 2022 karya Christopher Nolan dengan John Hersey Hiroshima 1946.
Jadi esensi jurnalisme adalah verifikasi. Film Oppenheimer itu dibuat dengan kisah nyata, tetapi tetap fiksi. Bedakan dengan liputan wartawan John Hersey, Hiroshima, terbitan majalah The New Yorker tahun 46, itu adalah fakta. Ini beda jurnalisme dengan yang lain-lain. Ya. Kita semua punya latar belakang yang beda-beda, tetapi jurnalisme itu mempersatukan kita dengan metodenya. Dalam sesi sebelumnya diterangkan berbagai macam metode jurnalisme. Sumber, terus kutipan, terus transparansi, terus balance, cover both side, dan seterusnya. Next, please. Siapa mau baca?
Saya Mas, boleh Mas?
Silakan.
Platform dari verifikasi. Bersikap setransparan dan sejujur mungkin tentang metode dan motivasi dalam liputan. Soal nama lengkap, tujuan wawancara, byline, email, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, dan seterusnya. Lalu bersandar pada reportase sendiri. Sadari prinsip urutan sumber, di mana sumber pertama bisa diandalkan dari kedua, dan seterusnya. Lalu bersikap rendah hati. Verifikasi perlu pikiran yang terbuka. Pertanyaan yang baik mencerminkan keterbukaan pikiran. Catatannya dari 5W1H, bukan pertanyaan tertutup dengan jawaban ya atau tidak.
Jadi tadi kita bisa substansinya adalah verifikasi, dan verifikasi ini punya 3 platform. Jujur dan transparan. Pakai nama lengkap. Pakai foto diri sendiri. Email, Facebook, Instagram, dan seterusnya. Yang kedua, harus tahu urutan sumber. Tingkatan pertama lebih tinggi dengan kedua, ketiga, dan seterusnya. Yang ketiga, rendah hati, berpikir terbuka. Ya. Next, please. Kalau ada pertanyaan, silakan ya, angkat tangan. Siapa mau baca?
Saya, Mas. Untuk yang keempat, wartawan sebaiknya harus independen. Wartawan harus bersikap independen terhadap orang-orang yang mereka liput. Lalu wartawan boleh punya opini, namun fakta adalah suci. Mereka tetap dibilang wartawan walau sikap jelas. Lalu menjadi netral bukan prinsip dasar jurnalisme, melainkan imparsialitas dan objektivitas juga bukan. Bila wartawan menulis tentang sesuatu dan ikut jadi pemain, jangan lupa transparan dan jujur. Dan yang terakhir, independensi dijunjung tinggi di atas identitas lain.
Sekali lagi, ini elemen keempat. Ini elemen yang membuat pekerjaan sebagai praktisi jurnalisme menjadi pekerjaan yang sangat menarik. Sangat menarik. Karena dia boleh punya sikap, namun dia harus independen terhadap setiap orang yang dia liput. Saya simpati dengan penderitaan orang-orang Rohingya. Tetapi saya juga tahu, saya harus independen terhadap orang-orang Rohingya yang saya wawancarai. Kebanyakan di Sumatera, Riau, Aceh. Dan saya juga tahu bahwa sumber saya bisa tidak akurat, bisa menyembunyikan sesuatu. Saya simpati dengan orang asli Papua. Sudah hampir 60 tahun, wartawan asing dilarang masuk dibatasi, bukan dilarang, untuk masuk ke Papua. Namun saya juga tahu bahwa tentu ada orang Papua yang melakukan kriminalitas. Ya, jadi itu independen. Next please. Siapa mau baca?
Boleh Mas, kalau boleh.
Silakan.
Hak asasi manusia, debat berkepanjangan. Bukankah hak asasi manusia buatan Barat? Di Indonesia, hak masyarakat secara bersama-sama lebih penting dari hak individu. Hak asasi manusia ada batasnya bukan? Ia tak boleh melanggar hak orang lain. Bagaimana soal debat antara hak sipil dan politik dengan hak ekonomi, sosial, dan budaya?
Ada yang mau menjawab?
Susah banget pertanyaannya, Mas.
Barat itu. Ya kan? Ya. Ada yang mau menjawab? Berarti kita nggak perlu dong hak asasi manusia. Kita kan bukan Barat. Gitu. Gimana menjawabnya?
Kan manusia nggak di Barat doang, Mas.
Oke. Tapi ini kan individualistik.
Betul. Individu kan tapi ada di mana-mana. Hak saya tapi tetap sama kan, Mas. Tadi kan Mas bilang hal yang menyatukan jurnalisme itu metodenya. Tinggal diaplikasikan aja ke hak asasi manusia, metodenya juga yang menyamakan.
Ya. Nah, sebelum saya jawab lebih jauh, ada pertanyaan dari Fahri Detik. Seperti apa contoh struktur ketika opini wartawan menjadi bagian dari penyampaian fakta dalam berita? Strukturnya bisa apa saja, Bung Fahri. Bisa piramida terbalik, bisa feature, bisa yang panjang. Di dalam setiap struktur, opini itu bisa masuk. Di dalam setiap struktur, opini itu bisa masuk. Ada pertanyaan lagi soal hak asasi manusia? Berarti kita gimana nih? Misalnya belakangan lagi ramai soal Zionisme. Ya. Di Nahdlatul Ulama misalnya. Dikritik rame-rame karena mengundang Peter Berkovits, seorang warga negara Amerika yang memang seorang pendukung Zionisme. Diundang ke Jakarta, bicara di Universitas Indonesia, di Nahdlatul Ulama, karena dia seorang Zionis. Zionisme itu kan nasionalisme Israel. Apakah seseorang tidak boleh menjadi nasionalis? Bagaimana dengan nasionalisme Indonesia? Pertanyaan lagi dari Faisah Solo Pos. Bagaimana menyampaikan opini wartawan dalam berita? Apakah berdasarkan kesimpulan berita atau pinjam lewat mulut narasumber? Buat saya lebih mudah sampaikan saja sendiri, tidak perlu pinjam-pinjam mulut orang lain. Gitu. Nanti saya berikan contoh ya setelah PowerPoint ini. Next.
Mas,
Siapa mau baca?
kalau
Silakan.
mengenai yang HAM tadi, Mas,
Ya.
sebelum membaca ini saya mau coba jawab yang tadi mengenai HAM. Kalau menurut saya, HAM itu bukanlah perdebatan antara Barat atau Timur atau punya Utara atau Selatan, tapi HAM karena dia melekat pada individu, maka mestinya dia tidak punya ruang dan waktu selama tidak melanggar hak sesuatu yang personal bagi setiap orang. Saya pikir begitu untuk perdebatan tadi tentang HAM.
Bagaimana bila, ini mohon maaf ya, saya
Ya,
mengatakan sesuatu tentang agamanya Mbak Ira lah.
mhm,
Katakanlah Mbak Ira ini agama X gitu. Saya bilang
mhm.
ini ada pemuka X yang mencuri gitu. Mbak Ira keberatan. Nah, bagaimana itu menilainya?
Dia kan berangkat dari kalau berkaitan dengan HAM kan dia berangkat dari nilai-nilai universal yang satu dan lain orang adalah sama. Jadi ketika misalnya dalam agama tidak dilihat berdasarkan ajaran agamanya masing-masing, tetapi berdasarkan nilai-nilai universal. Apakah itu melanggar individu lain atau tidak? Saya kira seperti itu, Mas.
Ya. Kalau kita ikut debat soal hak asasi manusia, minimal dalam 80 tahun terakhir, karena debatnya itu udah ratusan tahun, hak asasi manusia selalu ada batasnya. Selalu ada batasnya. Jadi bila ada orang bilang hak asasi manusia itu tanpa batas, barat, itu pasti nggak baca orang itu. Males mikir. Jadi di dalam berbagai macam perjanjian internasional, selalu ada batas-batasnya. Ya. Monggo, Mbak Ira baca yang slide ini.
Iya, debat soal hak asasi manusia sudah berkembang setidaknya dalam tahun terakhir. Kan dalam berbagai pertemuan, Perserikatan Bangsa-Bangsa, Geneva, and New York, dan organisasi regional lainnya. Ia sudah disepakati dari berbagai konvensi yang
Ya. Jadi ini sudah disepakati oleh ratusan negara. PBB itu jumlah anggotanya 197 negara. Dan setiap negara yang masuk anggota PBB harus setuju dengan piagam PBB soal deklarasi hak asasi manusia. Itu piagam PBB. Dengan kata lain, tidak ada satupun negara di dunia ini yang tidak menyetujui piagam hak asasi manusia universal. Ya. Nah, tetapi masih ada di bawah itu konvensi-konvensi, perjanjian-perjanjian yang lebih kecil. Dan itu ditawarkan apakah negara bersangkutan mau sepakat. Kalau pemerintah sepakat, dia harus bawa pulang ke ibu kota masing-masing, dijadikan undang-undang dan diratifikasi oleh parlemen masing-masing. Kalau di Indonesia ya diratifikasi oleh Dewan Perwakilan Rakyat. Nah, dengan kata lain, itu harus disepakati oleh parlemen masing-masing negara. Itulah hak asasi manusia. Hukum-hukum yang ada di negara tersebut harus disesuaikan dengan perjanjian internasional. Next, please. Siapa mau baca? Silakan, Mas Agung.
Indonesia ratifikasi perjanjian soal hak asasi. Konvenan internasional tentang hak sipil dan politik asasi, kemudian Konvenan internasional tentang hak ekonomi, sosial, dan budaya, Konvensi tentang penghapusan segala bentuk diskriminasi terhadap perempuan, Konvensi hak anak, Konvensi hak penyandang disabilitas, Konvensi menentang penyiksaan, dan PBB mengakui hak terhadap air dan sanitasi dalam sidang umum tahun 2000.
Ya. Jadi secara sederhana ya, Indonesia sudah menandatangani berapa nih? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 perjanjian internasional. Ini perjanjian isinya besar sekali. Hak sipil dan politik, hak ekonomi, sosial, dan budaya. Diskriminasi perempuan harus dihapus. Hak anak, penyandang disabilitas, dan menentang penyiksaan. Yang terakhir, hak air. Indonesia juga ikut dalam persetujuan tahun 2010. Sekali lagi, ini perjanjian besar sekali. Dan di Indonesia ada ratusan, bila tidak ada ribuan undang-undang, peraturan pemerintah, peraturan daerah, yang sebetulnya masih bertentangan dengan ketujuh perjanjian ini. Dan itu harus disesuaikan. Nanti saya berikan contohnya. Ada pertanyaan? Boleh tanya juga soal foto-foto yang saya pasang ya. Next please. Nah ini slide terakhir. Diklik semua Mbak supaya kelihatan semua. Siapa mau baca?
Saya, Pak.
Silakan.
Oh. Tindakan pidana bukan perdata. Bedakan antara slender lisan dan liber tertulis. KUHP tahun 1918 buatan Belanda 35 pasal soal pidana pencemaran nama baik maksimal penjara 7 tahun. Sekarang ada 100 pasal lebih dengan hukuman maksimal seumur hidup. AL Makar. Misalnya UU Internet, UU Pemilihan Presiden, UU Pornografi, UU Pemilihan Daerah, PP 77 soal logo daerah Papua, Maluku, dan Aceh. Idealnya tidak ada pidana terhadap pendapat orang dari sudah beberapa dasawarsa tidak sesuai debat soal pidana atau perdata saja, termasuk dalam KUHP 2023. Dewan Pers bikin terobosan lewat MOU dengan Kapolri dan Jaksa Agung. Khusus delik pers diselesaikan lewat Dewan Pers terlebih dahulu. Ia tidak meliput media sosial, blog, email, komunikasi pribadi, namun pers mahasiswa termasuk.
Ini poin terakhir. Anda yang menulis, yang membuat video dan seterusnya harus hati-hati. Karena di Indonesia pasal-pasal karetnya makin banyak daripada di Hindia Belanda. Di Indonesia makin banyak pasal-pasal karetnya daripada di Hindia Belanda. Termasuk Undang-Undang KUHP tahun 2023, ia akan mulai dijalankan tanggal 2 Januari 2026. Nah, khusus wartawan, termasuk pers mahasiswa, bila ada sengketa pencemaran, itu harus lewat Dewan Pers, tidak boleh langsung ke polisi. Ya. Saya kira itu dulu. Ada beberapa pertanyaan di layar, saya jawab sebelum saya tunjukkan video. Saya persilakan, siapa yang menulis ini? Sari Prawira. Silakan dibaca deh pertanyaannya.
Iya Pak, ini soal kasus kemarin Pak, yang waktu demo di salah satu kabupaten di Bone, ada kasus soal ini, soal kekerasan dari aparat juga. Teman saya sempat ini dapat kekerasan juga dan dipaksa untuk dihapus. Pertanyaan saya Pak, ini bagaimana harusnya wartawan untuk bersikap terhadap para aparat yang tidak memahami soal regulasi ini, soal pentingnya jurnalis dalam era konflik juga. Utamanya mungkin konflik-konflik yang lebih luas Pak, seperti Gaza mungkin dan Myanmar. Seperti apa seorang wartawan bersikap jika sudah menyangkut nyawa dan keselamatan diri Pak? Terima kasih.
Kalau sudah terancam keselamatan, ya lebih baik kompromi dulu. Bagaimanapun juga, sebuah berita tidak setara dengan nyawa, ya. Nah, tetapi perlu belajar cara mengambil gambar yang dihapus. Tidakkah ada cara? Katakanlah saya menghapus sesuatu di HP saya, setelah pergi, saya bisa keluarkan lagi gambar-gambar itu. Jadi cara itu dipelajari. Kalau masih mau repot, setelah aman, masukkan gugatan, masukkan ke propam misalnya, ke Dewan Pers misalnya agar polisi yang atau petugas siapapun yang menghapus itu diproses secara hukum. Nah, terus Made Dinda Yatnya Swari dari Berita Jateng TV, silakan dibaca.
Baik, jadi Mas Andreas ini mungkin sering dialami oleh rekan-rekan media di daerah ya. Saya ingin bertanya soal independensi wartawan. Nah, kalau menurut Mas Andreas ini gimana kan banyak banyak media yang dalam tanda kutip punya kedekatan dengan pejabat pemerintah atau partai politik. Misalnya ketika perusahaan media tersebut itu dapat pemasukan besar berupa iklan dari pejabat setempat atau partai politik ya. Karena kan kita tidak bisa menampik kalau media itu butuh iklan gitu ya. Nah, tapi dalam kondisi seperti itu wartawan media itu tuh sering menghadapi kesulitan, terutama mereka itu nggak boleh nulis hal negatif kepada pemberi iklan itu dalam arti pejabat setempat atau partai politik atau pihak lainnya lah yang memberi iklan. Nah, dalam posisi itu bagaimana ya biar kita bisa sebagai wartawan tetap menjaga integritas kita dan profesionalitas kita gitu. Terima kasih.
Bila Anda dilarang menulis berita tertentu karena iklan, ya Anda coba menawar dong. Berita ini penting. Bukankah loyalitas utama kita kepada masyarakat? Loyalitas utama wartawan itu kepada masyarakat, bukan kepada pemasang iklan, bukan kepada pemberi sponsor. Itu penting sekali. Nah, ditawar saja. Tetap liput, tetap tulis, tetap siarkan. Ya, katakanlah Anda dapat sanksi, permasalahkan sanksi itu. Gak bisa dong. Saya melakukan sesuatu yang benar. Gitu. Ditawar terus, diperjuangkan terus. Begitu ya, Dinda.
Oke, siap Mas.
Kalau dipecat gimana, Dinda?
Kan kalau dipecat mungkin masih banyak media lain untuk bernaung kali ya Mas ya.
Persis. Ya, ada pertanyaan lain sebelum saya tunjukkan satu contoh yang lebih konkret? Oke, Ibu Tika, tolong siapkan videonya bila bisa diputar. Saya membuat sebuah video yang mencoba menerangkan apa liputan hak asasi manusia tersebut dalam konteks Indonesia, dalam konteks hak perempuan, ya, hak anak-anak yang Indonesia sudah taken semua. Nah, video ini biasanya kalau saya setel, orang pada ramai. Silakan. Suaranya sudah masuk ya, Mbak Tika ya?
Nggak ada suara.
Suaranya belum masuk, Mbak.
Oke, sebentar, Pak.
Ya. Video ini bisa kalian lihat di YouTube. Gitu.
Tahun 1945
Agak maju, Mbak. Agak maju. Sudah kelewatan ini.
Indonesia, salah satu negara paling beragam secara etnis dan agama di dunia. Didirikan pada tahun 1945 dengan prinsip persatuan dan kebinekaan. Indonesia juga negara mayoritas muslim terbesar di dunia. Dalam 20 tahun terakhir, makin banyak pejabat bikin peraturan daerah yang diskriminatif, yang diilhami syariat Islam di beberapa daerah di Indonesia. Di Sumatera Barat, semua perempuan muslim diwajibkan memakai jilbab di sekolah negeri maupun gedung pemerintah. Sumatera Barat salah satu provinsi awal yang memperkenalkan peraturan wajib jilbab. Berbagai peraturan jilbab ini makin menyebar di seluruh negeri, mempengaruhi hingga 90% penduduk Indonesia.
Saya mematuhi peraturan berjilbab di tempat saya bekerja. Kolega saya sebelumnya dalam tanda kutip mengancam saya atau menulis sesuatu yang menakut-nakuti saya untuk memecat saya. Bagi saya adalah karena saya perempuan gitu, saya harus menghidupi anak saya harus mencarikan dia makan gitu. Jadi itu menjadi dia menjadi alat yang penting bagi saya untuk mencarikan anak saya makan gitu.
Dengan para perempuan yang terkena dampak itu ternyata dampaknya tuh luar biasa gitu ya. Terus kemudian bahkan ada yang waktu itu yang testimoni dia jabatannya ditunda. Terus kemudian ada juga perempuan yang tidak dilayani di misalnya di kantor-kantor di kantor-kantor pemerintah karena dia dianggap tidak menggunakan busana yang sopan sebagaimana peraturan daerah itu berlaku.
Memaksa perempuan dan anak perempuan untuk memakai hijab setiap hari merupakan serangan terhadap hak asasi mereka. Dampaknya terhadap perempuan dan anak perempuan sangatlah besar.
Jadi kalau soal pakaiannya, itu menurut saya tidak ada problem. Lebih banyak orang menggunakan jilbab, tentu tidak ada masalah. Tetapi ketika itu jadi mandatori, menurut saya di situ ada satu problem tersendiri.
Ketika putri seorang ibu merasa tertekan untuk memakai jilbab di sekolah negeri tempat dia belajar, keluarga itu memutuskan untuk melawan.
Kami ingin kepastian ya bahwa jilbab itu memang wajib. Itu saja poinnya. Kemudian memutuskan untuk menempuh jalur pengaduan ke ombudsman. Apalagi nanti yang dia bisa lakukan gitu.
Ombudsman Republik Indonesia mengunjungi sekolah putri mereka di Yogyakarta pada tahun 2019. Mereka memutuskan pihak sekolah seharusnya berhenti menggunakan peraturan soal seragam sekolah negeri yang menekan para siswanya agar memakai jilbab. Di beberapa daerah yang lebih konservatif di Indonesia, kami menemukan bahwa siswi beragama Kristen pun dipaksa memakai jilbab ke sekolah.
Saya seorang Katolik, yang mana sejak saya SD kelas 6 tahun 2006, saya dipaksa dan wajib untuk menggunakan jilbab. Konsekuensi kalau tidak saya menggunakan jilbab, saya tidak bisa melanjutkan pelajaran dan otomatis guru akan selalu menegur saya dan itu akan mengganggu proses belajar mengajar saya.
Yang terjadi ketika kita menggunakan jilbab itu tidak sesuai dengan yang dianjurkan oleh sekolah, maka itu akan ditegur. Rambutnya tolong dimasukkan, kalau tidak bisa jadi saya akan memotongnya.
Peraturan pusat dan daerah tersebut berbeda dengan konstitusi Indonesia dan melanggar hukum internasional. Pada Februari 2021, pemerintah pusat memerintahkan diakhirinya aturan wajib jilbab pada hampir 300.000 sekolah negeri di Indonesia, membuat siswi dan guru perempuan boleh memilih pakaian. Namun, organisasi konservatif menentang keputusan ini. Pemerintah Indonesia seharusnya menghormati kebebasan beragama, kebebasan berekspresi, dan hak perempuan dan anak perempuan. Pemerintah perlu menegakkan aturan baru ini untuk mengakhiri pemaksaan. Perempuan dan anak perempuan seharusnya bisa memilih busana mereka, termasuk jilbab, tanpa paksaan.
Terima kasih. Silakan bila ada pertanyaan, saya kembalikan ke moderator juga buat Pak Devjyot ya di Bangkok.
Baik, terima kasih banyak Pak Andreas untuk presentasinya. Dan untuk video yang terakhir juga saya merasa relate, karena dulu waktu pas kuliah saya kebetulan berkuliah di Padang Pak. Jadi berkuliah di Padang dan juga adik saya kebetulan waktu itu SMA di Kota Padang. Dan saya melihat bahwa teman-temannya itu memang diinstruksikan dan diharuskan untuk memakai jilbab, dan hampir semua teman adik saya yang baik yang Islam maupun yang non-Muslim itu memang menggunakan jilbab, Pak. Jadi saya sangat merasa relate tentang itu, Pak. Baik. Terima kasih Pak Andreas untuk presentasinya. Jadi kita juga sangat membuka wawasan ya bagaimana dalam sebagai jurnalis dan juga sebagai menulis reportasi bahwa kita memerlukan kebenaran fungsional yang mana itu sangat dibutuhkan oleh publik, kemudian juga loyalitas kepada warga, kepada masyarakat, kemudian juga kita diharuskan untuk bisa menjamin disiplin verifikasi, gimana transparan soal metode, juga bagaimana kita mencari tahu dengan menggunakan metode 5W+1H, dan juga kita juga tetap harus independen bagaimana kita mendapatkan dan bagaimana kita menyiarkan dari berita itu. Terima kasih banyak Pak Andreas untuk yang telah disampaikan. Halo Devjyot, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I have several questions for you in
Mhm.
this in the room chat, in the group chat. So I have chose some of the question. So the
Mhm.
first one is maybe you can answer it after I read it. So the first one is for those of us writers who have no previous experience in humanitarian journalism, what are the important steps we should pay attention to in carrying it out? The second question, during a recent large demonstration that ended
So,
in the building.
Dafa, sorry. So
Yeah.
I have the questions. Tika passed them on to me on
Okay.
chat. So maybe I can take
Sure.
them one by one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to thank Andreas for his presentation. The captions weren't working very well, but I tried to do a translation on my phone, and some of your points were very sharp, and thank you for that. I'll try and answer the questions as directly. So the first one, if I'm not mistaken, is for those of us writers who have no previous experience in humanitarian journalism, what are the important steps we should pay attention to carrying it out, right? May I just ask who asked that question so I could address the answer to?
Okay, Devjyot, this is the question from Aisyah Humaira.
Okay. Aisha, I think it's difficult because there's no right way to go about it. But I think my suggestion would be try and report on something that you understand well, maybe something within your community or close to your community, a subject that you understand, where you have the context, where you have the sources. It doesn't have to be the biggest story, in your province or in your country or in the region. I think many times in journalism, you have to start small. Even with the biggest series of stories that we do, very often it's one small story that starts it off. So I think my suggestion would be, if this is something that you're passionate about, that you want to do, start with a story in your local community where you almost have expert knowledge, and try and tell the story of what's happening in your community to a wider readership. I think that would be my suggestion in terms of starting small. I hope that answered your question. If there's a follow-up, I can take that.
Oke, thank you Devjyot. Mungkin Aisyah, apakah ada follow up untuk jawaban dari Devjyot? Aisyah Humaira.
All right, I can move to the
Okay.
next one. If
Sure,
there's a
sure.
follow-up, I can take it in a bit. I think the second question was, for example, during a recent large demonstration that ended in a building being burnt yesterday, the local parliament gave no response at all. Similarly, a few weeks ago, When we asked party officials about the impeachment process of a party regent, they also refused any comment. In the end, we usually rely on academics and observers for that balance. My question is, how can local journalists still produce balanced reporting when officials completely refuse to speak? If silence continues, is it enough to state they were contacted but declined to comment? And in a local context, who do you think is the most credible substitute for the government's voice? This is a really good question, and I think I think the way I would answer it is as follows. You know, I can understand that sometimes government officials don't want to respond, and sometimes the easy option is to say, we ask for comment and they refuse to comment. I think my counter argument to that is, it is absolutely essential to understand the government's thinking. So instead of approaching the story where you're just looking for comment, why don't you actually try and investigate what the government is trying to do, or what are the powers at play, or what is the motivation for the government to behave in a certain way? I think once you approach the story in the sense that I'm just not reaching out to the government to ask for comment, but I'm reaching out because I want to understand what's happening inside the government, I think that will allow you to do more reporting, to get the perspective of what's happening on the other side. Yes, analysts and academics are a good way of trying to balance the story, because you can ask them questions to see it from the government's perspective. But the other thing that you can often try, and this is something we do, we often try and speak to former government officials who may have been in that same position. And what that allows us to do is that the former or the retired official will be able to explain to you maybe why the government is behaving in a certain way. Also, speaking to former officials sometimes is useful, is because they may actually connect you with somebody in the government currently who will speak to you. So that's one of the tricks that we sometimes use, is to find a former official and speak to them, and that sometimes opens up a whole line of reporting. And just one last point: if the government is being silent, it's worth investigating why the government is being silent. Is it because there is an order right from the top that, maybe from the federal office, that we don't want any civil servants to talk? Or is there an order from the provincial level? I think just investigating silence often also gives you, is basically a reporting opportunity. I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, please put it in the chat. I think the third question is, how do you balance becoming a fly on the wall when seeing injustice, while the opposing side says that's necessary violence in your experience? I think there are two parts to this. I think one of the things that I often do when I'm in those situations is, at least when I'm out reporting, I don't think that much about what the story will look like. When I'm out reporting, I want to gather as much detail of what's happening at that moment. And I think, if your intention is to sort of later try to balance, fly on the wall versus the government's, or the authorities' explanation that this is necessary violence, gather the details of how an event is unfolding. Gather the details of, what sort of, for example, what sort of, are they using paramilitary? Are they, what sort of units are they using? If this is just, riot control measures, are they using rubber bullets or are they using actual ammunition? Have they brought in the military? I think small details in terms of what a government's reaction is, and how an incident unfolds often allows you, the small details allows you to create a bigger picture. And so if you're reporting, if your intention is to be a fly on the wall to cover one side, gather as much detail as possible. And then the way we report is, once you have all of that detail, you can then put that detail to the government and say, you say this is necessary violence. For example, say if it's a student protest, and say, well, you say it's, this is a necessary response, but why do you have to bring paramilitary troops against a student protest? It's not a national security threat. If you have those details, then you're able to ask the question in a much more focused way to the other side. If you don't have the details, the others, the government authorities may be able to find a way to ignore your questions because they know that you don't have the detailed information. So sometimes it's about reporting very carefully and asking the right questions. If you do ask the right questions to the right people at the right time, very often you will get a response. I'll give you an example. When the COVID-19 pandemic was happening in India, it was challenging to get a response from some people in government. However, when we did reporting on a certain story, we asked the right questions. We were able to get the response from the top medical official. And so sometimes it's about having those questions, and then the authorities will have to answer because they know that if they don't answer, if they don't answer, their credibility may be under threat. So that's one way of looking at it. The fourth question is, in covering conflict events, what efforts are made to ensure your own safety, and how do you minimize safety risks for informants being interviewed? That's a very good question. So at Reuters, we undergo a specific training. It's a 5-day training that's given to journalists who cover conflict and dangerous situations. We have to do this training, I think, every 5 years. And without this training, we can't go to the field where you have these dangerous situations. This training is very specific. It gives us training on medical emergency response. It gives us training on first aid. It gives us training on, the sort of weapons that are used in the field. It gives us training on how to deal with these situations. It gives us training on, say you have a hostage or a kidnapping situation, how do you deal with it? A lot of it is awareness. And at Reuters, we have also a very clear system and protocol to actually go into these difficult situations. And it has to be cleared by multiple layers of managers. So if any of us is going into one of these violent situations, there would be, A, we would be trained, B, we would have a very clear vetting process, and thirdly, we would all have the right equipment. So if we're covering street protests, for example, we will have gas masks, we'll have helmets, we'll carry a medical kit. In countries that allow us, we will have bulletproof vests. And so we'll have we'll have the training. So we have all of those protective gears. And the other thing is, when we go to report in those violent situations, we never report alone. There will always be a team of at least 2 journalists who go. So if I am out reporting and I have a photographer, and this is something Danish Siddiqui and I would do very often, if Danish is out front taking pictures, I will be standing behind him, just making sure I have eye contact. And so if anything happens, I can grab him and pull him out. In the same way, if I'm interviewing somebody and my focus is on taking notes, he will be standing behind me, just keeping an eye out. So if anything happens, he can grab me and pull me out. So we have very clear protocols. I think in terms of protecting sources, look, you have to be careful in two ways. I think one is digital and one is physical. So you may be in a situation where you're going to interview somebody who's a sensitive individual, and you may have local police or local intelligence that's trailing you. You have to find a way to, there are lots of ways to do this, and I don't want to get into details, but there have been situations where you're being followed, and if you think there is no way that you can basically stop these people from following you, don't do the interview. Call up the person and say, I'm sorry, I don't think I can do the interview because there is a security risk to you. So in those situations, just don't do the interview. But if you can find ways to get the people to stop following you, then you figure it out. The second is digital security. So, make sure your phone has a complex 4 or 6-digit password. So even if somebody takes your phone, they can't unlock it easily. Make sure that, you have a way of remote accessing your phone. So if your phone is stolen or taken by somebody, you can get in the phone and format the content. Make sure that you don't have backups in a place that are insecure. So, if you're speaking to a source, don't have a printout of their name and phone number sitting on your desk where somebody else can come and pick it up and go. So I think some of this is physical safety and some of this is digital safety. And I think you have to think about both those things at the same time. I think the last question was, what does it mean to maintain balance when delivering news, considering that in selecting the main topic, we may sometimes focus on just one point? For instance, when reporting on Israel-Palestine, one headline might be Israel attacks Palestine, while from other perspective, the headline could instead be Palestine attacks Israel. It's a tricky question. I think my answer is this. Report what you're seeing and report what is happening. And the story doesn't stay the same all the time. So when at the beginning of an incident, it may be Russia attacks Ukraine. And then later down the line, it may be that Ukraine launches a counterattack on Russia. You can't frame a story, based on your opinion. So you have to report what you're seeing. And I think in a situation where you're saying Russia has attacked Ukraine, again, you're going to try and balance it as much as you can at that moment. Will it be perfect? Maybe not. But I think what I've been trying to emphasize is that you at least have to think about it and you have to try and do it. So I think the fact that you're even mentioning this in a question is a good step, because it makes me feel that you're already thinking about balance. And I think once you start thinking about it, you'll find a way to do it. But please, I think the only other point I want to add is, please don't feel like there is one correct way to do it. There isn't. There are many ways of doing this, and you have to keep adapting, because as we know, the story doesn't stay the same. The story keeps changing. And so as the story keeps changing, you have to find a way to adapt to the story and keep introducing balance. Yeah, I think that answers it.
Okay, thank you so much, Devjyot, for your question, for your insightful answer that you have already answered all of the question that the participant gave you. So this is almost the end for our session today. So to sum up for today's session, we know that we can make it like this. Human right is like promises to make to each other, and the journalism is how we check that promises are kept. So like the journalism is how we verify like the human right is amplified in our society. Thank you so much, Mr. Devjyot, for your time here. Then terima kasih banyak Bapak Andreas Harsono untuk kesempatan hadir di sini dan juga telah memberikan banyak insight. Mungkin Bapak Andreas
Sudah habis waktunya ya.
mungkin
Bolehkah saya menjawab satu pertanyaan yang menurut saya perlu itu?
boleh dipersilakan Pak.
Tolong dibaca dong, siapa tadi yang tanya sama saya soal jilbab itu? Mbak Puput.
Iya, Mas.
Ya, silakan. Yang lain perlu dengar, pertanyaannya menurut saya mendasar. Silakan.
Iya, pertanyaan saya di Kota Medan sendiri ada kemarin tahun 2018, seingat saya. Kalau sekarang saya nggak tahu peraturan di mall itu seperti apa, tapi saat tahun 2018 itu teman saya akhirnya keluar dari mall karena peraturannya tidak boleh mengenakan hijab. Jadi dia memilih untuk keluar karena memang sehari-harinya menggunakan jilbab itu. Nah, pertanyaan saya tadi kan Mas bilang ini sektor negara gitu Pak peraturannya. Kalau misalnya perusahaan swasta punya peraturan seperti itu seperti apa gitu? Maksudnya apakah itu tidak melanggar HAM juga? Karena kan dalam Islam berjilbab juga.
Tidak. Jawabannya 2 dan 2. Tidak dan tidak. Jawaban pertama, bila ada sektor swasta melakukan kejahatan, itu adalah kriminalitas. Anda harus lapor entah ke polisi, ke lain-lainnya. Kalau yang melanggar itu negara, itu pelanggaran HAM. Oke? Atau pembiaran oleh negara, itu pelanggaran HAM. Itu satu. Yang kedua, menyamakan Islam dengan jilbab, itu statement yang problematik. Karena di dalam setiap ideologi dan agama, tafsir itu macam-macam. Ya. Jadi sekali lagi, sektor swasta bedakan dengan sektor negara. Katakanlah sekarang saya mencuri komputernya Pak Devjyot di Bangkok, komputernya Reuters. Mbak Puput saya tanya, itu pelanggaran HAM nggak?
Gimana Mas?
Saya mencuri barangnya Pak Devjyot atau barangnya Pak Dava, apakah itu pelanggaran HAM?
Kriminalitas, Mas.
Iya, kriminalitas ya.
Pelanggaran HAM nggak?
Iya.
Tidak. Bukan, karena itu swasta. Tetapi kalau yang datang ke kantornya Pak Devjyot itu polisi di Bangkok, ya, lantas barang-barangnya diambil, pelanggaran HAM tidak?
Iya kalau itu.
Pelanggaran. Jadi harus bedakan sektor negara dengan sektor swasta. Sektor negara dan sektor swasta. Kalau Anda lihat tadi penjelasan saya, selalu itu berkaitan dengan negara. Negara bertanggung jawab untuk mengatasi para aparat negara supaya tidak melanggar hak asasi manusia. Ya, kalau kita masuk ke sektor swasta, swasta bisa melanggar tentunya ya, tapi itu kriminalitas. Ya, swasta ini ribet banget. Tadi misalnya Mbak Puput bilang dilarang pakai jilbab di perusahaan swasta. Saya tanya Mbak Puput, dilarang pakai jilbab di sekolah Katolik, gimana itu?
Ya karena itu peraturan ya, peraturan masing-masing organisasi.
Atau dipaksa pakai jilbab di sebuah pesantren, pelanggaran tidak?
Iya.
Pelanggaran tidak? Dipaksa pakai jilbab di sebuah pesantren?
Tidak, karena itu kan pesantren sekolah Islam.
Saya tanya, swasta atau negara?
Swasta.
Swasta, jadi kuncinya itu swasta. Ya, sekarang saya tanya Mbak Puput. Katakanlah Mbak Puput punya saudara laki-laki, atau saudara siapalah, kerabat. Dia jadi pastor Katolik, dilarang menikah. Padahal dia ingin berhubungan seks sama perempuan. Melanggar nggak hak asasi manusia?
Tidak, karena itu udah aturan dari itunya ya, agamanya.
Iya. Jadi kalau itu sektor swasta, sangat rumit bila itu mau diatur oleh negara. Sementara negara itu pasti beragam. Tidak ada negara yang seragam di dunia ini. Sehingga kemudian dibedakan antara negara dengan swasta. Ada pertanyaan Mbak Puput?
Tapi kejadian yang kemarin itu pernah diusulkan untuk dilaporkan ke Komnas HAM.
Susah kalau ke
Susah.
Komnas HAM. Lebih baik lapor ke gugatan perdata.
Oh, oke.
Gitu. Swasta dengan swasta.
Baik.
Ya.
Sorry Mas Andreas, berarti untuk pelanggaran HAM ini harus ada unsur relasi kuasa negara dengan masyarakat
Negara.
hanya itu
Harus
atau
ada unsur
swasta
sektor
juga
negara.
bisa masuk?
Harus peraturan negara, pejabat negara, pegawai negara, polisi negara, tentara negara, jaksa negara, hakim negara, Mahkamah Agung milik negara, KPK milik negara. Jadi selalu ada sektor negara pelanggaran HAM.
Selain itu kriminal pidana atau perdata, betul?
Di luar itu ya biasa lah, swasta dan swasta, perdata boleh, pidana boleh, administrasi negara boleh dan seterusnya.
Berarti misalnya untuk kita bicara misalnya hak sehat misalnya Mas di perusahaan akan tidak tersedia ruang rokok, tapi berarti itu tidak masuk HAM ya berarti ya, karena tidak
Anda
berkaitan
harus
dengan institusi
laporkan
negara.
dulu. Kalau hak Anda sebagai pekerja dilanggar oleh perusahaan, itu kriminalitas perusahaan. Betul kan? Itu bukan pelanggaran HAM. Itu kejahatan oleh kriminalitas, dugaan kejahatan oleh perusahaan. Anda laporkan dulu ke Dinas Tenaga Kerja. Bila Dinas Tenaga Kerja membiarkan, nah itu pelanggaran HAM oleh Dinas Tenaga Kerja. Jadi kaitkan dengan sektor negara. Ini penting ya, pertanyaan tadi saya minta pertanyaan Puput itu dibacakan, karena penting membedakan negara dengan swasta. Negara dengan swasta. Katakanlah saya membunuh orang, katakanlah ini contoh ya. Itu bukan pelanggaran HAM, itu adalah kejahatan. Baik, terima kasih Pak Dava.
Terima kasih Pak Andreas untuk jawaban-jawaban tambahan dari teman-teman dan sangat bermanfaat juga buat kami sebagai jurnalis juga. Oke, baik. Terima kasih Pak Andreas dan thank you so much Devjyot for coming for this session. Sampai di akhir acara kita hari ini, mungkin saya ingin mengingatkan kepada peserta untuk mengisi daftar hadir yang telah disediakan oleh panitia di dalam kolom chat. Saya juga mewakili teman-teman dari panitia mengucapkan terima kasih banyak atas kehadiran teman-teman sudah menghadiri acara ini. Terima kasih.
Ya.
Thank you.
Dava, terima kasih juga. And Pak Andreas, thank you very much Bapak. Itu sangat luar biasa hari ini sesinya. Menurut saya sangat bermanfaat buat semuanya. Nanti kita juga ada ini di YouTube ya Kak. Kalau ada izin kita nanti taruh di YouTube biar sesi ini bisa di-follow oleh orang lain. Thank you Bapak. Devjyot also, thank you very much Devjyot.
Thank you Devjyot. Thank you Sachin. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you Pak. Outstanding session. We really enjoyed it. Thank you for joining and making it great. Thank you Pak.